I used European Brooks plums for this recipe because that's what I have growing in my backyard. And I've also got a couple apple trees, and I used this mystery apple tree that I'm not sure what type it is. It was planted in the house before I moved in. So if you know, let me know. After I wash the plums, I cut them in half and remove the seed. And you don't need to bother peeling the plums. But the apples, they do require peeling, so I used a peeler to peel those. And then I have one of those fancy apple cores to easily get rid of the core and also cuts them into pieces. And I saved all the apple peels and the core because my chickens love apples. So I filled my blender up with the plums and the apples, and you'll have to do this in a couple batches. So I ended up using 3 apples for this recipe, and the rest is plums. So you'll want about 90 ounces of puree, so you can use as many apples or as many plums as you want to get to the 90 ounces. And I use the pulse method on my blender to get everything mixed up pretty well. And then you'll want to put that into a slow cooker. And then for the spices, I used 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon ginger, 1/2 teaspoon nutmeg, 1/8 teaspoon cloves, and 1/4 teaspoon of cardamom. And then for the sweetener, I don't like to use sugar, so I used honey for this recipe and used about 1 3/4 cup. And make sure you get a spatula and get all that out of the cup. And I added 1 teaspoon of vanilla. For the citrus, I used orange for this recipe, and I used both the zest and the juice of 1 orange. And then give it a stir and make sure you taste it to see if it needs more sweetener or more spices. And I put it in the refrigerator for a couple hours just to let the flavors meld before I heated it up in my slow cooker. So I used, put it on low and then cover it. And then once it gets warmed up, give it a stir. And then when you put the lid on, make sure you leave some space open so that there can be some evaporation. And while that's in the slow cooker, get your jars prepared. So I just washed them in hot water and soap. You can also run them through the dishwasher. And then also make sure you wash the lids as well. And for making butters, you want to use the water bath method. So I don't have a water bath canner, so I just use my pressure canner, and that works fine. It just takes a little bit longer to heat up the water. So after I had it in the slow cooker for several hours, it still wasn't quite thick enough to my liking. So I just decided to put it into a pot and finish it off on the stove. You can keep cooking your plum butter until it's as thick as you'd like, but just make sure you test it out by putting a little bit on a spoon and in the refrigerator, because as it cools it does get a little bit thicker, so you want to keep that in mind. When the butter's the thickness that you'd like, it's time to prepare your lids, and you do that by placing them in a saucepan with a little bit of water, and that sterilizes the lids as well as softens the glue so they stick to the jars. When your water's simmering, it's time to sterilize the jars, and you do this by putting them in the water bath for about 10 minutes, and then drain the water out and add them to a wire rack. And then fill them with your plum butter, and I used funnels to make sure that I didn't make too much of a mess, and added about 2 scoops to each jar, and you'll want it just below the rim of the funnel. And then once you get it filled up, you just take your lid and put it on, and then also add the ring on. And you don't want to screw it on too tightly. Use your tongs to add it back to the water bath. And repeat that until you have all your jars filled. You'll want to keep them in the water bath for about 10 minutes before taking them out and putting them on a wire rack to cool. This recipe ended up making 8 pint-sized jars of delicious apple plum butter. Plum butter is great on toast, pancakes, sandwiches, crackers, just about anything. So give it a try.